Have you ever looked at a crystal clear lake and felt like it was hiding something? In Tennessee, there's a place like that. When the water level drops, the foundation of a school appears beneath the surface like a skeleton, clean, silent, and so unbelievable you have to look twice. A few decades ago, this was a schoolyard, the sound of the bell, kids running right across the exact spot you're staring at. And that is only the gentlest part of today's list. Welcome to 10 Most Abandoned Cities in Tennessee, and from this moment on, you won't look at Tennessee with the same eyes again because every location on today's list is a different way a place can disappear. Number 10. Elkmont Historic District. Elkmont. Why does a place that looks empty suddenly feel packed for a handful of nights every year? You drive into Great Smoky Mountains National Park expecting quiet. Maybe a little moss, maybe a little melancholy. Instead, Elkmont pulls the funniest trick. It spends most of the year acting like a forgotten summer postcard. Then it turns into a controlled crowd scene when the fireflies show up and the park has to run a lottery just to keep the road from choking. Here is the twist. Elkmont is not your classic burned-out factory town. It is the opposite, a vacation district built for comfort, not survival. In the early 1900s, families with Knoxville money treated these woods like their private summer living room. Downhill from the clubhouse, you have Daisy Town, cabins built from 1910 to 1915. Uphill, you have Society Hill, cabins built from 1912 to 1922. So why does it feel like a ghost town now? Because the wire got cut, politely, legally, and all at once. After the national park era, cabin owners stayed through leases that eventually ran out, and the renewal did not happen in 1992. One day you have a long-running summer community with keys and traditions. The next day you have cabins that still stand, but a lifestyle that does not. That is the real haunting here, not monsters. Just the sound of a whole era being told, time is up. Elkmont even had its own resort symbol, the Wonderland Hotel. It closed in 1992, was damaged by a fire in 1995, later collapsed, and was ultimately torn down. The place did not vanish in one dramatic moment. It faded in chapters like a story that keeps losing pages. And the park did not keep everything. The ending is a split decision. Some structures were removed so this would not become a full-blown neighborhood in the forest. Some were selected for preservation and restoration, a curated slice of the past you can still walk through. The National Register paperwork counts dozens of resources in the district, including 41 contributing buildings, plus contributing sites and structures. It is a lot, which is exactly why the debate lasted so long. Now picture the final scene. You walk past quiet cabins that look like they are waiting for a summer that never comes. Then night falls in late May into early June, and the woods start blinking in sync like someone is sending a secret signal through the trees. In 2025, the park scheduled viewing at Elkmont from May 29 through June 5, and yes, you needed that lottery to get in. So you tell me, would you rather visit Elkmont on a silent afternoon, when the cabins feel like a museum with the lights off, or on those few nights when the forest turns into a living switchboard and everybody suddenly remembers this abandoned place exists? Number 9. Loyston. Have you ever stood at the edge of a perfectly calm lake and felt like it was keeping a secret? Here is the blunt truth, delivered with zero poetry. You are looking at a town underwater, not a legend. Not a metaphor. A real place that used to have a school, a church, a few stores, and a routine, and now sits beneath Norris Lake like it got erased with a single neat swipe. Loyston did not collapse because people stopped caring. It did not rot from crime or lose a factory and turn into a cautionary tale. Loyston disappeared because the region needed a dam. The Tennessee Valley Authority built Norris Dam for flood control and electricity, and when the reservoir filled, the valley where Loyston stood did not get a dramatic goodbye. It got submerged. The Tennessee Museum sources describe Loyston as having around 70 residents in 1935, and the community was forced to leave as the dam project wrapped up in 1936. Imagine that. One year you have neighbors. Next year you have coordinates. This is the part that makes your brain itch. The project was meant to do good for the wider region, And it did. That is the official story people like to frame on the wall, but the fine print says a specific community had to vanish so the big picture could look cleaner. Progress is a polite word. Up close, progress can feel like a moving truck, a deadline, and a front porch that will never be visited again. Today, you do not drive through Loyston. You float above it. People even called the wide stretch of water here the Loyston Sea, which is a cute name until you realize what it really means. It means an entire hometown got turned into scenery. The surface looks peaceful, the kind of blue that makes you want to take a photo and pretend life is simple. Under that postcard is a street grid that does not get sunlight anymore. And before the water rose, someone did something strangely tender. Photographer Lewis Hine documented families around the Norris Reservoir project area, capturing faces that were about to lose their homes. The Tennessee Encyclopedia points out that these images preserved ordinary people right before the map changed under them. So when you stare at the water, you are not just imagining ghosts. You are imagining names, kitchens, and kids who did not know their town was about to become a lake. Even the cemeteries could not just be left to drown. TVA has described its program to survey graves and relocate burials for these projects, saying it investigated tens of thousands of graves and moved more than 20,000 following state law and family input. That is a sentence that sounds respectful on paper and still feels heavy in your chest when you picture what it meant in real life. So here is your choice. Do you keep looking at the calm surface and enjoy the view? Or do you let yourself feel the awkward truth underneath it? Because Loyston is not scary in the usual way. Loyston is scary because it proves how easy it is for a community to be removed without leaving ruins you can walk through. The water hides everything. The water makes it look clean, and clean is not always the same thing as gentle. Number 8. Old Butler. Butler. You are looking at a postcard lake. That is the trick. The water is calm, the hills look polite, and everything about Watauga Lake says weekend, not warning. But here is the sentence that flips the whole scene on its head. Old Butler is down there, not as a metaphor, as a downtown. Sealed underwater like somebody locked a small American town in a glass case and then filled the case to the brim. Old Butler did not disappear the way places usually do. It did not decay slowly, one boarded window at a time. It disappeared on schedule. It disappeared when the dam closed. On January 12, 1948, the gates at Watauga Dam shut, and the water began rising, swallowing the original town. The Butler Museum preserves that moment like a timestamp, the kind you can almost hear if you stand still long enough and let the wind stop talking. Here is what makes this story stranger than a typical abandoned town. Old Butler has a twin. A new Butler was moved up to higher ground so the community could keep living while the old downtown went quiet under the reservoir. You do not just lose your town. You watch your town split into two versions of itself. One version buys groceries and goes to school. The other version sleeps underwater, still holding its shape, just out of reach. TVA built Watauga Dam for flood control and hydroelectric power, and this valley had a long history with floods from the Watauga River. So the solution was not just to build a wall. The solution was to relocate an entire community and let the lake cover what used to be home. TVA has described Old Butler as the most populous community and the only incorporated town that a TVA project ever fully submerged. If you want a sentence that feels official and unsettling at the same time, that one does the job. The numbers sound clean until you imagine what they really mean. The Butler Museum notes that nearly 12,000 acres were acquired and 761 families were relocated. That is not a statistic. That is 1,000 tiny goodbyes. That is furniture loaded, photos wrapped, children confused, and elders trying not to show it. And then there is the detail that makes the whole thing feel like dark local comedy, the kind you laugh at because the alternative is crying. The museum recounts that TVA purchased the town, including City Hall and the jail for $35,000, and locals joked that the next mayor would be a catfish. Think about that joke. It is not just funny, it is a coping mechanism with punchlines. Sometimes the lake plays cruel and generous at the same time. During drawdowns for maintenance or drought, the water drops, and the old foundations can briefly reappear. Older residents come back like they are visiting a relative in a hospital, quiet, careful, staring at outlines that do not move. A street that is no longer a street, a memory that suddenly has edges again. So what is Old Butler now? It is not dead in the way a forgotten place is dead. It is stored. The Butler Museum acts like a memory vault, keeping artifacts and stories pinned to that 1948 gate closing. And Watauga Lake keeps the rest, smooth on top, heavy underneath. Here is your question. If the water pulled back tomorrow and the old downtown showed itself again, would you walk closer, or would you suddenly remember that some doors were not meant to be reopened? Number 7. Willow Grove. There is a town in Tennessee you cannot walk to anymore. You have to look through water. That sounds like a poetic line you put on a travel poster right up until you realize it is literal. Willow Grove is not sitting behind a rusted gate or fading at the end of some cracked road. It is down there, under Dale Hollow Lake, like a Clearwater version of Atlantis, except this one had school bells and church services and grocery runs instead of marble temples. The weird part is not that it drowned. Tennessee has more than one underwater town story. The weird part is that Willow Grove still shows you its face when the lake decides to blink. When water levels drop, the most famous trace appears, the school foundation. From above, it looks like a clean rectangle etched into the lake bed, as if the water forgot to erase the chalkboard outline. Photos of that foundation have made the rounds online for a reason. It is the kind of image that makes your brain whisper, "Wait, there were kids here." Willow Grove used to be busy enough to matter. In the 1920s and 1930s, it was described as the second largest town in Clay County, with everyday infrastructure that sounds small until you remember small is exactly how real life works. A grist mill, a school, churches, a handful of businesses, a community built around Iron Creek, tied into the Obey River system. It was not a fantasy village. It was a place where people had chores and gossip and plans for next week. Then the calendar moved, and the calendar did not care. In 1942, the federal project to create the reservoir rolled in. The land was purchased, families were forced to leave, and buildings were torn down because you cannot make a lake without removing what is in the way. The following year, 1943, Dale Hollow Dam and the reservoir were completed, and Willow Grove slipped completely under. Not with a dramatic collapse, with paperwork, bulldozers, and a rising line of water. If you want one detail that hits like a quiet punch, it is this. On July 18, 1942, residents held a farewell picnic on the school grounds. Think about how American that is. If you cannot stop the ending, you bring food, you sit together, you pretend it is just another summer day, even while you are memorizing the view. And because people are stubborn in the best way, Willow Grove did not vanish from memory even when it vanished from the map. Former residents and their families have continued to gather on Labor Day weekend year after year to remember the town that is no longer on land. That is the part that makes this story warmer than it is spooky. The lake took the streets. It did not take the attachment. Of course, a place like this collects legends the way old wood collects smoke. People still talk about Willow Grove School and a story involving a young person named Eddie Irons. A local tale that gets repeated in the way these tales always do, with half certainty and full emotion. True or not, the fact that the story survives tells you something important. Folks needed a way to explain the ache of watching a hometown get locked under glass. So here is your question. If you had the chance, would you rather stand on the shore and stare at that calm surface? Or would you put on a scuba mask and go looking for the outlines of your own curiosity? Because Willow Grove is not only an abandoned town, it is a reminder that sometimes history does not crumble. Sometimes history gets preserved crystal clear and unreachable until the water drops and lets you peek in. Number 6. Rhea Springs. In Tennessee, there used to be a place people called a fountain of health, and now it sits under a river. That sentence sounds like I am trying too hard. I am not. Rhea Springs was a mineral spring resort, a whole little economy built around the promise that a certain kind of water could fix what modern life was breaking. People came to take the waters. They stayed for days, sometimes weeks, because healing was not supposed to be rushed. It was supposed to be a ritual, slow and hopeful, with a hotel bed at night and a glass of sulfur, spring water in the morning. Rhea Springs was not born as an industrial town. It was born as a cure. That is what makes its ending feel especially strange. This was a place with a big hotel, smaller cottages, a post office, a school, a church, and the quiet bustle of a community that existed to serve guests who did not want to leave. According to local history and reporting, the resort had real weight for the area, like a small stage where people acted out the fantasy of getting better. But then the world moved, and it did not move in Rhea Springs' direction. The railroad bypassed the resort, and the town started to dwindle before the dam ever showed up. It is a familiar American heartbreak. Not everything dies from scandal or disaster. Some places die because the main road chooses someone else. The promises stay the same, but the traffic does not. And when the visitors stop arriving, a healing resort starts to look less like a destination and more like a memory with shingles. Then came the final, unarguable ending. Watts Bar Dam, built by TVA, flooded the lower Piney Valley area in the early 1940s, and Rhea Springs was inundated. The place did not get a slow retirement. It got sealed, buried alive in water like someone pressed pause on a whole town and never hit play again. What I cannot get over is the detail that TVA surveys in the late 1930s still recorded a large hotel and a cluster of homes. That means this was not an ancient ruin. This was recent enough to feel familiar, recent enough to picture curtains in the windows and someone stirring coffee. And then, suddenly, the waterline did what rumors and railroads could not. It finished the job. Today, you can camp nearby at a recreation area with the same name. People pitch tents, swim, fish, launch boats, and laugh in the sun beside Watts Bar Lake. It is wholesome. It is also quietly absurd. You are roasting marshmallows next to the outline of a resort that once sold hope by the glass. You are enjoying a vacation beside a vacation that got erased. In low water season, often in winter, parts of the past can briefly reappear. Concrete patches, hints of foundations, the kind of pale shapes that look like bones through skin. Locals talk about the old cemetery and a water tank as remaining landmarks, and then they point out toward the lake like they are indicating a missing tooth. Right there, that is where the hotel stood. That is where people believed they could be fixed. So here is your choice. Do you come here for the calm water and pretend it is just another lake day, or do you let the place mess with you a little? Because Rhea Springs is not frightening in a ghost story way. It is frightening in a real story way. A community built on healing that ended up permanently submerged while the world kept camping on top like nothing ever happened. Number 5. Morganton. There is a town in Tennessee that lived off a ferry for nearly 170 years. Now, the only thing still standing watch over where it used to exist is a cemetery. That is not me being dramatic. That is the kind of sentence that makes you swallow before you keep driving, because it is blunt in a way a map can never be. Morganton sat on the Little Tennessee River near the meeting point with Baker's Creek, and in the 1800s it grew into a local trading hub, a flatboat port, kind of place where the river was not scenery, it was payroll. This was a town that made sense in the old American way. Water brings people. People bring commerce. Commerce makes a town feel permanent. The funny part is how quickly permanent turns into temporary when history decides it needs your wood, your land, or your river. Morganton lost its first war before it lost its river. During the Civil War, Union forces under General William T. Sherman moved through this region in late 1863. The detail that sticks is almost petty, which is exactly why it feels real. When they needed a crossing and could not wade the river, they used timber from empty structures in Morganton to build a bridge. Imagine watching your town get taken apart like a hardware store, not burned in a blaze of legend, dismantled because someone needed boards. If that was the first erasure, the second one came with paperwork and a timetable. Tellico Dam was not just a construction project. It became a symbol delayed and fought over, the kind of thing that turns into a national argument about whether progress is always progress. There was even the famous snail darter controversy, a tiny fish that helped drag the whole debate into courtrooms and headlines, the classic story of a small creature standing in the way of a big dam. People still talk about it like a fable because it sounds like one. And then the gates closed. TVA records note that the Tellico Dam gates closed on November 29, 1979, to begin impoundment. That word is so clean, impoundment, like the water is just being parked somewhere polite. But in real life, that is the moment the valley starts turning into a lake and places like Morganton become a used to be. Now picture the scene the modern visitor gets. Tellico Lake looks calm, almost expensive. It has the glossy surface of recreation, boats, weekend plans. And then you pull up near the Morganton Cemetery and suddenly the whole landscape feels like it is wearing a mask. The cemetery sits there overlooking the water, the last witness with a fixed stare. No houses to tour, no main street to photograph, just names, dates, and the quiet insult of a view that used to be dry land. And because Tennessee never wastes a good mystery, Morganton also carries whispers. People have told stories about Cherokee-blazed trees in the area, marked trunks that supposedly hinted at hidden wealth, like the land itself left breadcrumbs. Is it true? Who knows? But legends show up where something is missing because humans hate blank spaces. So here is your choice. When you stand by that cemetery and look out over Tellico Lake, do you see a peaceful reservoir? Or do you see two disappearances stacked on top of each other, a town that got stripped for lumber in wartime, then sealed underwater in peacetime, until the only thing left to say, this was here, is stone? Number 4. No business. Have you ever seen a place with a name that feels like a warning label? No business. It sounds like a joke you would put on a roadside sign to mess with tourists. But once you understand what it was, the name stops being funny and starts feeling like a door you probably should not open. This community did not vanish in a blaze. It did not get wiped out by a single disaster that makes headlines. No business did something quieter and, in a way, more unsettling. It slowly removed itself from the world. According to the National Park Service, the settlement's story stretches from the first settlers arriving in 1796 to the last resident leaving in September 1960. That is not a short life. That is a long, stubborn existence that ended with a final light turned off on purpose. People love to explain the name because humans cannot resist a mystery with a punchline. There are folklore versions that sound like campfire warnings, the kind that imply you should not step into that valley at all. And there is the more practical story that gets repeated too about someone saying there was no business living in such an isolated place, and the phrase stuck like a burr. Either way, the effect is the same. The name keeps you at a distance before you even arrive. Here is the real mechanism, and it is almost worse because it is so ordinary. The National Park Service points straight at the slow killers. Isolation, lack of available land, lack of work. No business was not strangled by one dramatic event. It was squeezed by a lifestyle that became harder to justify with every passing decade. When logging and mining declined, the economic oxygen thinned. When World War II pulled young people out, many of them did not come back to resume the old rhythm. Not because they were disloyal, because once you have seen the wider world, middle of nowhere stops feeling romantic and starts feeling like a trap. Now imagine walking into the valley today. You do not get a neat ruin like a movie set. You get fragments that make you lean in close. Crumbling stone foundations, old metal wash basins, barbed wire fences, stone walls built to fight floods along the creek. Little objects that still look useful, which is the creepiest part. It is not that everything is gone. It is that the owners are gone, and the objects did not get the memo. The valley becomes a room after everyone left the party, with cups still on the table. And then there is the cemetery. If you want the coldest detail in this whole entry, here it is. National Park Service historical documentation notes that the earliest known historic grave found within the Big South Fork area is at No Business Cemetery, on a small ridge north of No Business Creek, marked by a small stone carved with RS 1848. Just 3 characters and a year. No speech, no explanation. It is like the land itself whispering, "We were here and we were early." So tell me, if a place is called No Business, do you take it as an invitation to leave it alone, or do you take it as a dare? Because no business is not abandoned in the usual way. It is abandoned like someone slowly backed away, decade after decade, until the world could not quite remember how to reach them. And if you step into that valley, you are not just visiting a ghost town. You are visiting a decision. Number 3, Wilder. Have you ever driven into a town and felt like you just crossed an invisible border? Like the air changed and suddenly you are not in America anymore. You are in somebody's system. That was Wilder at its peak, a company town founded around 1902, built by the Fentress Coal and Coke Company, part of a whole cluster. People still call the Wilder-Davidson area with names like Davidson, Crawford, Twinton, Highland, floating around it like satellites. Wilder was not a town that grew, Wilder was a town that got installed, and for a while, it worked. During the coal boom, Wilder pushed past 2,000 residents. It started with around 100 houses, then added roughly 70 more in 1917 when production increased. Later, State Route 85 cut through the town beginning in the mid-1930s, making Wilder feel connected, even if the real connection was always vertical. Worker to company, company to store, store to rent, rent to paycheck, paycheck back to company. If you want a kingdom, that is how you build one, not with a crown, with a company store. This is why Wilder's signature feeling is so strange. It looks like a regular small town from the outside, but the center of gravity was always the company store, the place where life got priced and permissioned. The store was not just where you bought flour. It was where you learned whether you were doing okay in the only economy that mattered. Then the math turned ugly. The economy softened, wages were cut, and the people who did the cutting expected the people being cut to just take it. Wilder did not. Workers organized hard, and the biggest strike began on July 9, 1932 and stretched into April 1933. That is not a quick protest. That is a long, grinding refusal. Picture the tension that builds in a place where everyone is connected by the same employer, the same rent, the same fear, and the same pride. In a company town, a strike is not just a labor action. It is a civil war conducted with looks, rumors, and whose porch lights are still on. And then you hit the moment that makes Wilder feel like it never fully stopped being haunted. On April 30th, 1933, Union President Barney Graham died on the steps of the company store. The details blur depending on who tells it. Motives, circumstances, what was said, what was seen. Over time, the story got fogged up by conflicting accounts, which is exactly why it sticks. A clear tragedy becomes history. A fuzzy tragedy becomes a secret. Wilder has the kind of past that still feels like it is holding something back. After that era, the town thinned. Coal mining continued into the 1950s, but the company eventually moved on, and by the 1970s, many traces were destroyed. That is the final insult of company towns. They can appear quickly and disappear quickly, like a stage set that gets struck the moment the show stops making money. So here is your question. When you stand in a place like Wilder, do you see a simple small town that faded with the coal industry? Or do you feel the outline of a kingdom that once ran on a company store in a single paycheck cycle? Because Wilder is not abandoned in one dramatic collapse. Wilder is abandoned in layers, and the last layer is always the same. The company leaves. The town realizes it was never allowed to belong to itself. Number 2, Old Jefferson. Jefferson. If a place gets erased without any natural disaster ever touching it, then who is the disaster? That is the question Old Jefferson leaves hanging in the air like smoke that never fully cleared. This was not a town that died. It was a town that got executed early. Old Jefferson was founded in the early 1800s, and for a time it mattered enough to be the first county seat of Rutherford County before the center of government moved elsewhere. It sat where the Stones River split and braided, a perfect river town position back when rivers were highways and a good bend in the water could make your whole future. Then the 20th century showed up with a blueprint and a timeline. The J. Percy Priest Dam project came with land acquisition, engineering forecasts, and a very simple assumption. The future lake would cover the town site, so the town had to go. Buildings were raised. The place was bulldozed in anticipation, like you were tearing down a neighborhood because you were sure the tide would swallow it. The cruelty is not only in what happened, the cruelty is in how reasonable it probably sounded at the meeting where the decision was made. And then the water did something that makes this story feel like a prank with teeth. The lake did not cover Old Jefferson the way the calculations expected. People later noted that the water did not reach the town site as predicted. So you end up with the rarest kind of ghost town. Not one drowned by a reservoir, one burned for a reservoir that never came, a sacrifice made to a future that refused to show up on schedule. Some local stories add one more layer of weird. When the lake was being filled, people claimed the water did not behave like a neat bathtub. They said it could leak away into nearby cave systems associated with the Long Hunter area. As if the ground itself had a drain the planners did not fully account for. Whether you treat that as geology, rumor, or both, it fits the mood. Old Jefferson is the kind of place where the land feels like it has secrets, and the paperwork feels like the villain. What does Old Jefferson look like now? It is not a tidy ruin you can tour. It is the opposite. It is the forest, swallowing the street grid, old roads getting overgrown, stones and bricks still there, half hidden like the town is trying to hold on to its shape while nature presses a pillow over its face. You do not hear the usual ghost town soundtrack of creaking signs and wind through empty windows because the windows are gone. This is an urban silence, the kind that comes after the microphone gets cut. And that is what makes Old Jefferson so unnerving. It is not only the loss, it is the logic. A town can be removed because someone believed in a future with enough confidence to destroy the present. And once you destroy the present, you do not get to destroy it when the forecast is wrong. So let me ask you, if you walked through that overgrown grid today and saw the last bricks and foundations, would you feel like you found something hidden? Or would you feel like you found evidence? Because Old Jefferson does not feel haunted by spirits. It feels haunted by decisions, the kind that cannot be taken back even when the water never arrives. Number 1. Hales Bar Dam. Powerhouse ruins. Hales Bar. If a dam starts bleeding from day one, how long does it live before the whole system has to replace it? That is not a spooky question. That is an engineering question that turns spooky the moment you stand in front of the answer. Because this is not a quaint ruin tucked in the woods. The Hales Bar Powerhouse ruins are a long, heavy industrial body planted on concrete legs, jabbing straight out into the Tennessee River like it refused to step back. The building is empty now, but it still looks too big to be empty. It has the kind of scale that makes you whisper without realizing you are doing it, as if the structure might wake up and ask why you are staring. You can place it in your mind in one sentence and feel how real it is. The Powerhouse sits on the east bank of the Tennessee River, jutting into the water near the foot of Etna Mountain, and across the river you can still see remnants tied to the old lock. That is the visual that sells it. This was not a story. This was infrastructure. It was built to control the river, and now the river is the one controlling what remains. The architecture itself tells you it kept evolving like a patient who would not stop needing treatment. The historic documentation describes 3 connected parts: a transformer house, an operating room, and a Western addition that TVA built around 1952 when it installed 2 more generating units to boost output. That detail matters because it shows the dam was not quietly limping. It was being patched, expanded, and pushed, like everyone involved was determined to make it worth the effort, even if the foundation was already telling a different story. and eventually the story won. TVA has described Nickajack Dam as being built specifically to replace Hales Bar Dam because of persistent leakage, and it notes that Nickajack is the only dam in the TVA system constructed to replace an existing hydro facility. That is a polite sentence with an ugly implication. Hales Bar did not just get upgraded, it got replaced because the leak was not a flaw you could outwork. It was a personality. When Nickajack was completed in 1967, Hales Bar stopped operating. The dam itself was dismantled in 1967 and 1968, and the Powerhouse became one of the few major structures left behind. That is the part that feels like a myth, even though it is simply chronology. The giant gets taken apart, but its ribcage stays, still stuck in the river, still making shadows. Now here is the twist that makes this entry feel like it belongs at number 1. The place is not only ruins. It is also, bizarrely, alive. A business operates right there today with tours and open hours, and it is a whiskey distillery. Spirits literally on top of a structure that looks like it is haunted by the concept of power. You cannot write irony cleaner than that. The river took the old purpose, but the site kept its magnetism. People still come. They still walk around. They still want a taste of what used to happen here. So imagine your final shot. The sun is low, the water is dark, the Powerhouse stands on its concrete legs like a stubborn animal that refuses to lie down. You are looking at a machine room that no longer makes electricity, but it still generates a feeling. And here is the question you leave the viewer with. Do you think Hales Bar is abandoned because it failed, or is it abandoned because it was too expensive to keep pretending it could be saved? Something stranger. Sometimes a place disappears because a dam closes on schedule. Sometimes it fades because the road, the railroad, or the jobs simply stop choosing it. Sometimes it gets erased by decisions that felt logical in a meeting room, then looked cruel on the ground. If you made it to the end, you just traveled through 10 different ways. A community can vanish while the land keeps going like nothing happened. Now I want to hear from you. Which story hit you the hardest? And which place would you actually visit if you had one free day and a full tank of gas? Drop your pick in the comments and tell me why. If you want a part 2 with 10 more hidden and haunting places across Tennessee, hit the like button so I know to keep digging. And if you love this kind of dark history with real locations and real receipts, subscribe and turn on notifications because the next town on this list is already waiting.